Leaders' questions, and I call on Deputy Barry Cowan on behalf of Fianna Fáil.
Thank you, John Corda. Tánaiste, I'm sure you're aware, as many of us are indeed, that many people are very nervous to walk the streets of our towns and cities at night and even day. Violent crime is a huge concern, and government, we believe, needs to show greater support to Gardaí in tackling this. In recent weeks, we've seen a number of high-profile violent assaults on persons. These and such crimes appear to be happening more frequently, in broad daylight as well as at night. There appears to be a knife epidemic in many parts of Dublin, and many areas are becoming no-go areas. We wake up this morning to hear of a postmistress in Bayside involved in a tiger kidnapping, of a shooting dead of a person at a school in Balbriggan. People, Tánaiste, are worried and fearful and afraid to walk our streets. And it appears that the lack of Garda presence is feeding that frenzy. And it's not confined to Dublin, as you know. There's a massive meeting in Roscrea during the course of the summer, where counterparts of Dublin and many rural towns and villages throughout the country express their fears, their concerns and their anxieties about the policy of government in relation to the availability of Gardaí on our streets. In Dublin again, a crisis is developing where locals and tourists alike fear for their safety on our main streets. The likes of O'Connell Street and Grafton Street and other well-known streets in Dublin and other towns appear, unfortunately, nowadays to be very threatening. We have drug dealing at Lewis stations. The likes of Dublin is now fast getting a reputation of being a crime-riddled city, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Very briefly, if I might ask a question, Ciaran Corley.
Yep.
The lack of Gardaí on the beat, as I said, is of great concern. The numbers of Gardaí on our streets continues to decline. People need assurance from government. They need to know what means, method or way are you and your government going to assist Gardaí to confront crime-riddled cities and towns throughout Ireland today.
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, in relation to the attack which happened at the weekend, in relation to Johnny Cooper, which I presume you're referencing, I just want to give him and his family the sincere sympathies of the House. It seems to have been a particularly horrific attack. I'm surprised, as you referenced Dublin City, that you're not aware of the complete overhaul that's going on in Dublin City, particularly on both sides of the city centre, over a protracted period of time, to actually, in fact, get Gardaí back on the beat in the city centre and in the residential areas broadly between the canals. This initiative has been hugely successful. If you take the trouble to speak to the Gardaí who are involved in going out to individual communities, to streets and to individual houses, you will find, in fact, that both the Gardaí and local people have been extremely praising of it, and in fact, as I understand it, the results of this are being constantly evaluated with lessons that may be learned from what's been happening. I don't know if you're familiar with it or if you've heard of it, but it has certainly resulted in a very significant activation of Gardaí, particularly at street level, on the basis that you appear to wish to see happening. And I would expect that you might actually congratulate the Garda management on this particular initiative. Yesterday morning, I was talking to a number of Gardaí at a function down in the Docklands in relation to their experience of the initiative, and they were talking about how well it's going in terms of the cooperation of local communities of the kind that you describe as being desirable with the Gardaí. The CSO crime statistics that were released do not do not reveal any dramatic changes, but on the other hand, as I know and you know, that any crime that happens to an individual is traumatic. Anybody who's subject to whether it's a burglary or it's any other crime, it's an absolutely traumatic experience for the individual. And certainly in relation to the Gardaí, you'll be also aware that the recruitment process in terms of new Gardaí being recruited and Templemore being reopened has actually commenced. So in fact, the strength of Garda numbers has been addressed by this government. So I'm slightly at a loss, Deputy, as to why you would describe, given where the figures are at, any crime is of huge significance to the individual, the family, the street, the community where it happens. But in fact, the CSO crime statistics indicate no huge change. And as I say, you seem to be completely unaware of the initiatives that the Garda management have taken to increase, to actually put Gardaí on the street and to connect up to individuals and local communities.
It's Deputy Barry Cowan's question, if you don't mind. Thank you. Deputy Barry Cowan, thank you.
Tánaiste, Mr. Cooper, and we all send our best wishes to him, is one of many unfortunate victims in recent times. He might be more high profile than others, but he's one of many. And I do speak to Gardaí, and I empathise with them, and I congratulate them for the efforts that they are making. And I speak to the public too, and as I'm sure you do, or you should do. And I expect if you're talking to many people in large estates throughout Dublin and throughout the country, one of the biggest points and greatest points that they make is they don't, unfortunately, see enough Gardaí on the beat. They do not see enough Gardaí available to help and assist them in protecting them and protecting our streets. We need a greater presence. And I accept what you've said in relation to Templemore in recent times.
Question, please.
But what assurances can you give this House, and more particularly, can you give those that we represent, the public? What assurances can you give them that come 3 weeks' time, when you have to make decisions in relation to how you build the recovery, as I say yourself? When you're doing that, will you have cognizance for the fears and anxieties that exist in Dublin and in other cities in relation to the lack of available Gardaí? And can you assure this House that you will make funding available and you will increase the number of Gardaí on the beat, on the street, showing presence and giving people assurance? That's what we need to hear.
Thank you.
You can talk about statistics all day long, for as long as you like, every week or every day if you wish. But those that I represent and those that I talk to,
Deputy.
and those that everybody else here is representing, want to hear you commit to this House and commit to the public a commitment to make funding available to improve the amount of Gardaí on the street, helping to assure people that they will reside in a safer place.
Well, as I said to you, and obviously you suggest that you have some experience of talking to Gardaí, but it seems to me that you're not reflecting in your comments the efforts that the Gardaí are making to revitalise. Well, sorry, you're in denial. As I speak, the initiative that the Gardaí have taken to, in fact, revitalise community policing using a model that's being developed in the city centre and which has been in operation now for some considerable period of time is bearing very significant fruit in terms of its popularity among members of the public, the appreciation of the community, because the heart of the policing relationship is actually with the community at a local level. In that I agree with you. Community policing is vital, and I think what the Garda management are doing at the moment shows us the way in which to increase contact with the community and therefore collaboration and cooperation with the Garda, which is essential. The second thing is that in relation to the issue of robberies in the wider, both in the Dublin area and other large towns and cities, vacancies, the Gardaí have been operating a number of specific programmes because, for instance, these days the motorways, as I'm sure you are aware, have become avenues for professional criminals to travel to distant parts of the country away from their own location, and the Gardaí have set in train a number of very specific programmes which have been quite successful in apprehending some of the professional criminals who have been involved in this. Thirdly, you asked about commitment to the Gardaí. Just let me say that the first recruitment to Templemore since 2009 has taken place this summer, with more to follow on, and that is the commitment that this government has made to increasing the strength of the Gardaí, and I have to say that I and the government were extremely gratified to see the huge interest by people in joining the Garda force.
Deputy MacDonald.
Tánaiste, when your government took office in 2011, you promised a departure from the stroke politics and cronyism which had permeated past Fianna Fáil administrations. In fact, at the time, An Taoiseach, if you recall, went so far as to describe the election of this government as a democratic revolution. And yet, here we are in 2014, and we see that An Taoiseach Enda Kenny has clearly bought into the politics of the past, with his nomination of Mr John McNulty to the board of the Museum of Irish Modern Art to facilitate him as a Fine Gael candidate in the upcoming Seanad by-election. So it appears that at least An Taoiseach regards the use of state appointments as an appropriate way to bolster the qualification of his candidate ahead of this election, a case, Tánaiste, of jobs for the boys. So, Tánaiste, given the stink of cronyism that hangs around this turn of events, can I ask you, will the Labour Party fall in behind Fine Gael once again and support Mr McNulty's nomination? Do you support An Taoiseach in the actions that he has taken? And will your Labour Party colleagues be supporting and indeed voting for Mr McNulty?
Sorry, it's not usual or acceptable in this House by tradition that we name individuals from outside this House who are not here to defend themselves. And I'd ask members to respect that, please.
Well, firstly, Deputy, the practice has been that if a vacancy arises in the Seanad from one of the government parties, that the government party from which the vacancy arises nominates a person to fill that vacancy. You'll be familiar with that practice yourself, for instance, parallel practice on city councils, on county councils, and indeed in the European Parliament, where in the case of your own party, when people have stood down, as happens with all parties, and a vacancy arises, you yourselves as a party have nominated people to fill that particular vacancy. So what we're talking about is a standard practice which has happened in relation to the filling of casual vacancies, that in the case of the Seanad, in relation to the government of the day, the vacancy lies with the party from which the vacancy has come. And as I said, that's consistent with what you have done yourselves on previous occasions in city councils and in the European Parliament, and indeed all parties and independents have followed. All parties and independents have followed that practice. Fianna Fáil has followed that practice. Independents have followed that practice. That's the norm in relation to this. Therefore, the actual nomination is a matter for the Fine Gael party, for its leader, and for the members of Fine Gael. It's not a matter for the Labour Party. It's a matter for Fine Gael. In relation to it's a matter for the party which has the vacancy, and it is for that party to make that nomination. And they have done so.
You mind your own business, please. Well, it's somebody else's question.
Sorry.
Deputy MacDonald's question. Now let the Tánaiste answer. Our time is up now.
And in relation to your comment, in relation to the gender of the individual, just let me say, and you asked me where the Labour Party stands. Where the Labour Party stands, Deputy, is that of the 11 appointments to government which sit around the cabinet table, you have to see that of the 11 people in the Labour Party who have been appointed to sit around the cabinet table, 5 of those are women, 2 at senior government level, 2 Minister of State level, and the Attorney General is also a woman. So if you're trying to throw some dust on what the policy of the Labour Party is in relation to the promotion of women, I suggest you have a look at the history of the Labour Party, and you'll find that we justifiably have an extremely proud record of promoting women throughout the Labour Party. And when it came to Senate nominations, I'm delighted to say at the formation of the government that a significant number of those appointments which were from the Labour Party, whether on elected panels or otherwise, were in fact very well gender balanced, and women featured prominently in those appointments. If you're asking me to account for the internal practices of Fine Gael, that's a matter for the Fine Gael party, and I suggest that you address your issues in relation to that party. But let me say, yourselves in Sinn Féin, you have been heavily involved in appointing different members of your party to different boards as appointments to boards arose, where you, in the context of your participation in government in the North, obviously were able to influence and to call the appointments. And I think previously it's been pointed out that people like your current MEP from Dublin, Ms Boylan, was actually appointed to Safe Food Ireland, and there's a list of Sinn Féin appointees to boards as they arose. I'm sure those people were all eminently qualified for those appointments, but you made them.
Sorry. I'd ask people on both sides of the House, please, to respect the ruling of the Chair. I'm here as an independent referee. There's time limits. I'd also remind deputies that it's a long-standing practice in this House that the business of the Seanad ought not to be discussed here. And however, I've allowed latitude because it's a leader's question. But it is a matter for the Senate. Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
I didn't raise the issue of gender. I raised something entirely different. I have asked you if you approve of and support the actions of An Taoiseach in using an appointment to a state board to create qualifications for his candidate for an election.
So you can't make accusations like this in the chamber.
I have asked you if you support...
Deputy, you're not allowed to make accusations like this in the chamber. People can make up their own minds about the appointment. It's not going on.
I am asking you if you support the manner in which An Taoiseach has managed this affair, which has given rise to considerable public comment and concern. Tánaiste, should state boards be used as a springboard to qualify an individual for a Seanad panel? Is that appropriate? You say this is a matter for Fine Gael. Appointments of that nature are a matter for government. And indeed, appointments to state boards, I repeat, are a matter for government. They happen on the watch of the entire government.
Thank you.
So are you satisfied with the manner in which An Taoiseach has conducted this? I'd also say to you that in your very lengthy response, which managed not to answer the questions, you described a process of co-option, which of course is not the case in the Seanad by-election. It is an election. And I asked you whether you and your colleagues in the Labour Party would be supporting and voting for the candidate.
You're not right to stand up and ask people who they're going to
I am asking you.
Sorry,
so
please resume your seat.
Sorry,
Not be sorry. You're not entitled to use this chamber for political reasons. Asking people who they're going to vote for is not acceptable. You're deliberately preventing me
from asking
I'm
questions
applying
that I
the
wish
rules
to
of the
put,
House in
and I
case
would
you
like
don't
an answer
understand
to
it.
Does Tánaiste the support
But you
the
don't
Taoiseach
ask those
in his
questions in this
actions,
chamber.
and will the Labour
don't ask
Party
people who
again
they're going
fall
to
in
vote for.
behind Fine Gael and back the candidate?
No,
I
but you
think
resume
those
your
questions
seat.
are clear, and I look forward to
This is not what
Tánaiste
leaders'
response.
questions is about. Tánaiste.
Well, Deputy, you're not addressing the Ard Comhairle of Sinn Féin now, where you may choose how to tell people how they're going to vote or else. You're actually speaking in the Dáil, and you have no right to direct people of any party or none as to how they are going to cast their secret ballot. And it is quite impertinent of you to suggest how members of the Dáil or the Seanad, it's fine if you do that to your own members via your own processes. They're voluntary members, as I understand it, of your political party. You can offer them your guidance and your direction if that's the way your party works. But this is actually a secret ballot. The nomination falls to the party which has the vacancy. I've just said to you that that's the practice within government. Do I accept that practice? Yes, I do, because that is how it is done and has been done. If you're suggesting, and you also raise questions about the IMA appointment, the
Sorry, would you mind if you can't... Deputy, you're outside the chamber. Would you please get quiet? Thank you.
well, I think Deputy
Sorry. Tánaiste. I'm asking you please to respect the chair. Are you listening to me? I'm asking to respect the chair and please resume your seat. You're over time. Thank you. That matter's been dealt with. I call on Deputy Catherine Murphy.
Tánaiste, I want to raise with you today the circumstances surrounding the Y case and the subsequent draft report. The last time I addressed this issue with you was on the day the Dáil went into recess. And that was the week the UN commented strongly and criticised Ireland in relation to its abortion regime, particularly in cases of rape, incest, where there's a fetal abnormality and where the woman's health is at risk. Since then, we've had the tragic Y case and the publication of draft guidelines, which appear to be even more restrictive than the limited legislation. In fact, the guidelines, Miss Y would be even less likely to have received the termination that she requested. One consultant psychiatrist, Veronica O'Keefe, in the Business Post says that in the opening statement of the draft guidelines, it serves to reinforce the complete prohibition on abortion and not, as one might expect, to make abortion legal when a woman's life is at risk. Over the summer, we read the barbaric details of the Y case, the case of a very young woman arriving in a foreign country, having been raped, and was told that it was not within her financial remit to have a termination, and ultimately, after attempting suicide, she was forced to deliver the baby through an unwanted caesarean section. We've had the X case, we've had the tragic Savita Hanifer case. We're running out of letters in the alphabet, but behind each one of them, there's a real woman who happens to be a wife, a sister, a mother, a daughter. This Saturday, people will take to the streets in a march for choice. Each time the numbers grow. And how many times will it take before the government listens and acts?
Question, please. Thank you.
The reality of it is that the young woman involved, if we're looking at the report, was not even consulted. Everyone else seems to have been consulted, but not the young woman.
Thank you.
Tánaiste, the government can ignore the calls for the repeal of the 8th Amendment, and the last time I asked you about this, you said people were consulted in 1983. You had to be born in 1960, before 1966, to have been consulted. I'm asking you, Tánaiste, about the guidelines. Did you see the guidelines? Did you agree to the guidelines? Are you aware the guidelines are more restrictive than the legislation?
Thank you.
And will you acknowledge the public calls and the changing public opinion in relation to repealing the 8th Amendment?
Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to the references that you made, Deputy, to the case of Miss Y, I think we're all aware that this is a very sad case of a young woman who arrived in Ireland seeking protection as an asylum seeker, and that subsequently her baby was delivered. And what I'm concerned about in discussing this is that her confidentiality and her vulnerability should be respected, but also that of the baby. There is a young woman, a young mother and a young baby involved in this, and I think at the outset we need to say that we want to see the best outcomes for both of them. She has since been granted legal status in Ireland, refugee status in Ireland, and I also understand that she is currently in some contact through her legal representatives with the team which are inquiring into the circumstances of what happened. The information which was published in the media in recent times is not a report. I understand it arises, the information which has come into the public domain, from work being carried out in the context of the report which is being prepared. And I understand that Ms Y, through her legal advisors, which is appropriate, is in some contact with the people carrying out the inquiry. But that really is a matter for her and for her legal advisors, and I think it's important that we don't intrude on her privacy or that of the baby in relation to the ongoing inquiry, which I hope will be concluded as quickly as possible, and we will then get the full facts on the case. But what appears to have happened in terms of the information which was published to date and which was broadcast this week is that there seems to be, as we know from when this case first came into the public domain, missing information in relation to what actually happened to her at various stages. So this is not a report, nothing has been published, and I think it would be appropriate to wait until the full facts as can be established into this particular case are published by the HSE inquiry team, and that's been a commitment which was given in late August by the Chief Executive of the HSE. In relation to the guidelines, those guidelines were published last week by the Minister for Health and by the HSE, and clearly doctors involved in the care of women, both during pregnancy, in terms at birth and after pregnancy. I expect in the context of the debate that they will discuss and consider those guidelines.
Thank you.
In relation to your question on the 8th Amendment, I believe I answered this before. The Labour Party, way back in 1983, did not support the introduction of the 8th Amendment into the Irish Constitution. What I said to you before was that the people of Ireland voted for the amendment of the Constitution in their wisdom. And quite a lot of parties in this House supported that amendment. The Labour Party did not. I myself campaigned at that time against it, and they're the facts of the situation. I agree with you that public opinion in this matter has changed, but remember that we have about 70,000 babies born in Ireland every year, and I think one of the things is that we want those babies to be wanted babies, and we want them to be born in the best possible circumstances.
Thank you. Deputy Murphy.
Tánaiste, there was a report published, it was a draft report published in the newspapers this week, and what it talked about was the report was highly critical of how disjointed the process was and how impossible it is to coordinate the response. And that, I've got to say, is really setting alarm bells ringing in terms of the protection of women in situations where their lives are at risk. Now, can I say about the Labour Party and 1983, and I want to acknowledge the role the Labour Party played at that time. It was brave, it was against public opinion, it took courage, but you are letting those people who went out in 1983 down. If you took that position then, when you're not prepared to take a position now, when public opinion is on your side and you're in a position to do something about it, that, I've got to say, must be hugely disappointing to Labour Party people. You didn't adequately answer the question in relation to the guidelines. Are you satisfied with them? They are less. They roll back on the legislation, which is restrictive legislation. Did you agree with them?
Thank you.
And are you happy with that restrictive legislation is even more restrictive in relation to the guidelines? What role did you play in agreeing them?
Well, I think you're actually rushing to judgment, Deputy, if I may say so. I can understand why, given your own particular stance, and you have always been upfront about these issues, and I respect that. But I think that you're actually rushing to judgment, and I want to make this distinction. We have to find the actual facts of the case, and in relation to the document that was published earlier, it actually says on each page that this is a draft document and can only be considered as such. This document can be expected to contain factual clinical inaccuracies and or information that may require additional clarification. So I want to put it to you that it's not a report, it's not even a draft report, it's workings and draft documentation in relation to a report, which is going to be very important to establish the facts of what happened. You're asking me to anticipate the outcome of the report, and I can't do that because I don't know the facts, and I want to be very clear about that. In relation to the guidelines, let me say this, that it's the legislation which was passed by the Dáil here, in my view, so far has actually operated in a way to protect, and this is what it's designed to do, to protect both the life of the mother and the life of the baby during pregnancy. And the circumstances of this particular case is that, from what we know from the public domain, the circumstances came to the panel and to the operation of the Protection of Life and Pregnancy Bill very late in the pregnancy. Now, if you're suggesting that at 24 weeks somebody should be given an abortion, I just want to make clear that that's not a position. That's not a position that I agree with. That's not a position. That's not a position that I support.
We're over time. Thank you.
That's not a position that I support. I want to make that clear. But what we don't know, and what we need to wait on the report to get the best possible information, is what actually happened to the young woman between the period when the pregnancy was identified and the period when she came before the panel in the context of the operation of the pregnancy, of the Protection of Life and Pregnancy Act. And we don't know as yet, Deputy, the answers to that, and therefore I think you're jumping to conclusions before we get the facts.
Thank you. That completes Leader's questions for today.